Hello, I'd like to welcome everybody to our second Sea Dog series of the season. We have Billy Reiser speaking about Wormley Creek today. Restrooms are to my left, your right, back in the corner. Coffee and some cinnamon rolls over there still if you'd like to get a snack. I'll turn this over to Bill Small, and he will introduce Billy and go from there.
Thank you, Pete. And we're very lucky today to have Bill Reiser as our speaker. And I was going to say he doesn't really need an introduction. But you know what? I got a piece of paper he wrote, and I think I'm going to give an introduction, just a short one. So here we go. Okay. Bill here, Reiser, he's a native of Hampton, Virginia. And he attended Hampton schools through the 8th grade. And then he attended 4 years of high school at Fort Union in the military academy. And then he was accepted into the University of Virginia Engineering School. And these are all things. I never knew this kind of stuff. I thought he lived at the Marina all his life as a little kid. So we're going to all learn a lot. He spent his summers on Wormley Creek, starting in 1938. So pretty small, Bill. Okay, and then he will celebrate his 89th birthday on April the 14th. So, all right. So it's a big crowd, and you all have to help in this. If you can't hear in the back, start hollering, raise your hand, something. Bill, thank you.
Thank you, Bill. I'm in trouble already because I see some folks here that have family and generations have been on Wormley Creek long before I came here, for sure. But anyway, to get started, I need eyes in the back of my head and maybe another arm and a hand if I have to keep some notes in my hand. But anyway, I want to orient some of you who probably are not familiar with the area of Wormley Creek. And this picture was taken from an NACA plane, which might have had the most sophisticated camera around the area here at the time. We don't know this for sure, but this plane was used with NACA to take photographs of planes doing the various maneuvers and things as part of their work back in those days, aeronautical research. The picture is taken looking more slightly west of north, and you can see up here the Gloucester shoreline and Gloucester Point. This is the entrance to Wormley Creek, and there's two branches, the west branch and the southern branch. Now I'm going to start on this side. The Marina that I started in 1955 is located right in here. This is a marsh at that time. It's now my home site. My home is built right there. Over here is the Fahrenholt home mansion, built in 1842. Okay, these homes along the road here were back in 1940, the homes of Polish people that came here. And I'll get to the point why they came shortly. This place right here was the Oak Point Club, bought in 1938, and that's when I and my family came into this area. We spent our summers here until a little later, which I'll get to. Okay. Right down here is the Morse family's home, which I think was the only occupied dwelling on Wormley Creek in those days, right on the creek. There were homes around the creek, but I think that was the only one that was occupied. Anyway, next to it, right there, we knew it as Callis's Wharf. A gentleman by the name of Mr. Callis seemed to control it and own it. It's right there at the public landing where the ramp and dock is. It exists today at the end of Old Wormley Creek Road. If you go up this branch of the creek right here, near the end of it is the Mallbank Cove Clubhouse and Recreation Center. And behind that would be the Mallbank Cove development. Starting here, going all around here, is Mallbank Farm development. Nothing occurred there until after the war. And, of course, this area belonged to the government, to the Naval Mine Warfare School. It's now the Coast Guard base. Okay, starting at the Fahrenholt home, it was built in 1842. The owner died in 1857. He named it the Waterview Plantation. I have a copy of here, and there's some copies if you all want to look at them afterwards. He had one son that, it was a large family, but he had one son just before he died in 1919, wrote down his memories of his years as a youth here living on this plantation. And this plantation, this set of memories were found by a descendant up in Richmond, probably in the 80s. And so what I'm going to tell you comes from that. This fellow that found the papers that were written about it sort of had to decipher them a little bit, but the fellow that, the son that wrote these papers about his youth was a pretty intelligent fellow, you can tell by the way he wrote them. Anyway, he said that the plantation's boundaries extended about a mile to the east along the shoreline of the river, which would put it close to where the Amoco oil facilities dock is now located. He said on Wormley Creek that the boundaries extended about a mile up the creek. And the assumption being that probably it's more or less a square section there. I don't know how many acres. When you came down here, you probably drove over some of it just before you got to the refinery site, to give you some idea. Okay. There's a couple of interesting excerpts He writes that his estate just below Yorktown and separated by only a small creek from Temple Farm, where the capitulation of Cornwallis was signed 100 years later. Anyway, he speaks to a monument in Yorktown embracing nearly 1,000 acres, which had been a crown grant to one Ralph Wormley. This land extended from about where the surrender was signed with Cornwallis and George Washington, and apparently went all the way to the creek. It was always known as Wormley's Creek. Today, it's known as Wormley Creek. At some point, the Wormleys was dropped. But I know in 1920 it was still called Wormley's Creek. Okay. One other little tidbit of information. They had a number of boats, both small and large, were kept in the creek in secure shelter only a few hundred yards from the mansion. There is no question that that is exactly where the Marina is today. You could call it the beginning of the Marina, but I don't think the word Marina was coined until sometime in the mid-50s or something. Anyway, that, I guess, would be the beginning of Wormley Creek Marina, in a sense, although I had no idea until I read this that had taken place. Anyway, it says a number of small boats, small and large, were kept in the creek in a secure shelter only a few hundred yards from the mansion. And a Negro man, Elijah, who was lame but otherwise in fine, healthy, and robust health, always had charge of the boats. And it was his sole duty to keep the family in fresh oysters and crabs and have a suitable boat ready for the family or frequent guests to go fishing or take a sail. Moving on. On this road, there were a number of Polish families, about 6 in 1940, living here. There were 2 houses that had families other than those families. And I think somebody possibly other than those families lived in that Fahrenholt house. But I do know that at least one of the Polish families lived in that house at one point. Okay, the Polish families, there were 13 families that came here from up north somewhere back around just after the turn of the century, 1900. Anyway, they came here to work in a factory. I always heard that ever since I was a little kid. But I spoke with one of the members of the families, one of those families just recently, to try to find a little more about it. And she's been sort of the one keeping the history of the family. She was a 3rd generation, a little younger than me, but been around quite a while. Anyway, she said that the people came here, were recruited, so to speak, to come here to work in a Portland cement factory that was going to be built right there by the Fahrenholt house. And it was going to be financed by a gentleman that had the money. But he decided to take a vacation or go to Europe for some reason or another. On the way back, he had the bad fortune of taking the Titanic, and he went down with the ship, and that was the end of the Portland cement factory. These people changed to farming, I think, mostly. After that, there was, right along in here, that area, a Catholic church down there at that time. It was there until 1938 when it burned to the ground. Right here, right in this area, is a cemetery where most of the first generation people that came down there are buried. Maybe some young children that maybe didn't survive back in those days. That cemetery is still there. It's being maintained by some of the people, some of those Polish families. Okay. In 1938, that house and the family, the Morse family, their grandson is sitting right here and looking at me now, making sure I don't tell anything he didn't right. Anyway, that was the only house that I'm aware of that was occupied on Wormley Creek, both branches, at that time. There were houses near the creek, but generally speaking, when somebody built a house anywhere around Wormley Creek, they built a house on the road, as far away from the water as they could, as close to the road as they could. I suspect that house was built, where it was built, not to be on the creek to see the water, but because they probably farmed and they used the land, and it was a convenient place to put the house. That's my guess. 1912, okay. You got it. Okay. The next is Callis's Wharf. That's at the county's public landing. There was a wharf dock out there with a good-sized building on the end of it, where seafood, mostly oysters and clams, I guess, but heaven only knows what else was brought in there. And that was there. By the end of the war, there was very little going on in that house, as far as I can remember. But I was told a while ago, I think a hurricane demolished it. Hurricane Hazel, was it? Okay. Well, anyway, I suspect maybe in years earlier, back in the 20s, early 30s maybe, and before, there was a lot of produce, I think, shipped out of Wormley Creek too, and at times. So, anyway, what I want to emphasize is the value of oysters and clams, oysters in particular, and what it meant to these small communities around. We had problems of people pilfering. All the bottom that was productive was leased from the state of Virginia in various, it can be large, very large areas, and some small as an acre or more or less. When I started my business, I didn't know what I was doing. I was just a young guy. But I had heard stories about litigation over oysters and oyster ground all my young life. So one of the first things I did was find out who owned the oyster ground where I was going to start my business. And one of the reasons I did that was because right in Wormley Creek we had one of these lawsuits over oyster ground. Right there. Well, a fellow came and bought one of the first lots on Marlbank Farm subdivision. And he'd retired, and he built a pier, or had somebody build it for him. Not too big, went out about 75 feet from the shore. just deep enough. They had a 30-foot boat, and they weren't big boats 30 feet long in those days either. Probably one of the first big pleasure boats in the creek, and tied it up there. But anyway, there was an old man who, I don't recall his name, he was blind. That was the name of the man that had the place, yes. But the man I'm talking about went in the creek and gathered oysters and clams and things and sold them to live, get money to live by. He filed a suit about damage to oyster ground and loss of oysters. I don't know how it was resolved, but that gives you some idea of the importance of oysters and how, unfortunately, in those days, the communities, everybody knew each other and were related to each other, and usually it was an outsider of some sort that did something that didn't come in, and the one filing the suit for damages was a local guy who knew the judge and knew the lawyers and the lawyer or the local lawyer or whatever. But it didn't usually work out too well for those folks that were the ones that came in. Anyway, stirring up bottom in any way, or even on the land where silt could get in the water, that they could pinpoint it and make a claim. And the claims were very hard to and there was one thing that happened down in Hampton. A line was laid across Back River to the NACA laboratories of some sort. I don't know whether it was electric line or a pipeline, but anyway, the big suit occurred against the government on that. And the government hired some divers to go down. They couldn't find any traces of oysters anywhere around there. But that's the kind of thing that went on. Moving on, as I said, up this branch of the creek was the Marlbank Cove subdivision and their recreation center. It's a very large length of land coming down here on this branch of the creek and all around it for Marlbank Farm subdivision. And okay, I left out one thing here. This place, the Oak Point Club. The Oak Point Club was a piece of ground bought in 1938 by 10 people. My father was one of them. 9 of them were the top people for NACA. Some were in Washington, D.C., and then an office up there that dealt with Congress. And some of them were out at Langley Field. 2 of them from Langley Field at least left shortly after that, very quickly. One going to Cleveland, Ohio to set up what's now the John Glenn Lab. And the other one went to the West Coast to set up the laboratories out there at a place called Muroc then, but I understand it's Edwards Air Force Base today. That, in the beginning of the war, made a change that these folks knew they were going to have to sell. We were going to have to sell this property, but as the war came on, there just wasn't any way to do it. So they decided to hold on to it until after the war was over. And my father's job out at NACA was not that of an engineer or a scientist. He was in charge of all kinds of things as a head of mechanical maintenance. And there had been one, they called this the camp, NACA camp. A lot of people did. They didn't realize it was no connection with the government or NACA, but it was privately owned. Prior to that, there was a place down in Hampton, in the Fox Hill, that they had used starting back in early 20s. NACA had sponsored this. They'd rented some property. But anyway, to make a long story as short as I can, the main purpose of that was to bring people to Langley Field, to the laboratories, to important people, people in Congress in particular, and anyone that could have any influence on getting money to keep that laboratory at Langley Field going and operating back in the days before and during the Depression. You can imagine what a congressman out in the middle of the country somewhere representing some people out there would be very reluctant to vote for large appropriations of money that it's going to take to build these wind tunnels and all the facilities that are out there. And anyway, in 1938, or late into 37, showed up, and they had to give that place up that they had. The idea was to bring these people, give them a tour of the facilities, and then take them and have a party afterwards. Oyster roasts were the big deal back then. And take them to a party where they could let their hair down if they wanted to, or whatever the saying goes. Anyway, as most of you may know, there was no liquor served in restaurants or anything, any alcoholic beverages back then in this state. So when they had to let that place go, they decided they wanted to get further out, away from town, so to speak, away from everything. In 1938, out here, you were really away from everything. The road wasn't even paved, I don't think, going in here at that time. And then power came in about that time. No power. So the land was bought, a rather substantial clubhouse was built, and as I said, some of them were transferred. By this time they realized they were going to have to sell it, but couldn't do it until after the war. And so they decided to let people working in various divisions out at Langley Field at NACA use it during the war for purposes of parties, oyster roasts mainly, and that sort of thing, for morale activities, you might call it. When the war was over, my mother had been in the real estate business. She was one of the early women in real estate on the peninsula, and dating back to about the mid-30s. And she was asked to sell it for them. And I'm not so sure, I kind of have a feeling that she actually found that property for them, because in about 1942, the beginning of 42, she bought from Mr. O'Hara, who developed Mall Bank and Edge Hill. She bought from him a little piece of land here where the Marina is, part of it. And we built a cottage there, and we spent our summers there. We'd spend our summers at the clubhouse because my father took care of it, kept it up, and had made sure everything was working when somebody needed it. And but in 1942, he bought that property. We bought that property. So another thing about the oyster thing is a little story. Sometime towards the latter part of the war, my father had bought many a bushel of oysters from Mr. Callis, who had the building on the end of the wharf, and that was his business, oystering. And got to know him pretty well. And Mr. Callis told my father that knew where we were, and asked him to let him know if we saw any strange boats coming in the creek. Back in those days, the only boats in Wormley Creek were little flat-bottom skiffs that people used for, generally speaking, for fishing, oystering, clamming, and net fishing for mullets and that sort of thing. Anyway, Sure enough, my father came home from work one day, a couple of hours before dark, and this boat came in the creek. It was probably 30, 35 feet long, workboat, typical Chesapeake Bay workboat, and tied up right there. They had some pilings, I think, back then and along there, where boats had tied up occasionally. And so anyway, Mr. Callis, knowing where we were and where we could see all that, he had asked my father to let him know if we saw any strange boats come in. It has to do with oyster poaching and that sort of thing. Oh, my father said, "Son, let's go see Mr. Callis and tell him about this boat." And we drove about 5 minutes down to Hornsbyville where he lived. My father knocked on the door. He came to the door. He told him the situation. Mr. Callis says, "I'll be with you in a minute." He came back out with about a 6-foot-long double-barrel shotgun and put that piece of artillery in the car and headed back up. It didn't turn out to be anything. My father took him out in the boat and they checked it out, no problem. But that gives you some idea of the value of oysters and oyster ground and that sort of thing. Where are we with our time?
Well, it was exactly what you wanted to know about, 10:30.
10:30. Okay. The Marina. In 1955, I'm a young guy. I didn't know anything about business, but I somehow had it in my mind I wanted a business and to earn my living and to make a living. Anyway, I'd had 2 or 3 people come by at least, maybe more. I had a little pier out there that got big enough to tie up a few small boats, 2 or 3 small boats besides my own, and wanting to rent a space. And I think I let 2 or 3 of them do it, and I probably charged them $1 or $2 a month or something like that at the time. But it got me thinking a little bit. In 1955, I'd pretty well made up my mind I wanted to start a business. So we had a bad storm in April of 1955. They just started working on the refinery pier and dredging. They were doing a lot of dredging down there and they were starting to build a pier for the oil refinery. And all that stuff was caught up in that storm and broke loose. And dredge pipes and floats and walkways and all kinds of stuff. It all landed right there. They came and got what they wanted, and I think there was another big pier from somewhere up down the river. It landed there, but when it was obvious that nobody was going to bother with any of the rest of it, I went over there and I started salvaging the boards, some beautiful boards, stage boards, 2x12s, 16 feet long, a lot of 2x6s. I didn't have any money, but I wanted to start a business. So now I had the boards. I had to find money to buy some nails and things and a few pilings. But anyway, that's how it got started. I'll tell you one more story about this business. When my parents bought this piece of property, we went up by the road just a few feet from where you turn the drive down to my house now. And I'm walking along the side of this road. It just recently been paved, not very long, tar and gravel road. And I spotted something. It was a lady's wristwatch. And it had 2 bands on it, one on each side, and one was missing. The watch had been run over by a car, so it was useless as a watch. However, it was studded with some sparkling things. And anyway, my mother says, "Oh, we got to go up to the Hornsbyville store," which is where everybody came. They had the post office there, and that was a gathering spot for everybody in the area there. And let them know we found this watch, so in case anybody wanted to claim it. Nobody did. And bear in mind, about this time, and this was 42, the war started. There were a lot of people coming into this area everywhere to work in the shipyards, various government installations, and that sort of thing. We assumed that probably somebody was, heaven only knows how it all happened. But anyway, I never could find the hell of the band. We went down and looked at it. My mother finally decided to take it down to the jeweler in Newport News, and they offered her $125 for this thing, which was a lot of money. My mother always said she should have gotten more, but that's... Anyway, I was dreaming, boy, what I was going to do with that, because I found it. She said, "No, son, you're not going to buy any toys with this. We're going to buy stock." I said, "What stock?" I can't play with that. She bought, and my father bought, a couple of shares of American Tobacco Company stock and a couple of shares of Bendix Aviation Company stock and a couple of shares of the bank down in Hampton. I can't. That bank in Hampton is now Truist. I never stole and put it in my name, but I couldn't put my hands on it at that time. But anyway, my bottom line here is that in this business, when I needed money, I used that stock to borrow money and as collateral with the bank. And that's how I was able to buy the more expensive things I needed, like the boat hoist and when I needed to expand the pier and pay for dredging when we did that. Now, dredging is another story. We started in 1961, right after Hurricane Donna. I mentioned that this was a marsh. That's where my house is now. I got permission from the owners of that marsh to put the dredge spoil in it when we started dredging. And the dredging actually went on as long as I had the Marina, just about. In later years, I had to put it up on land and then get it hauled away. I gave it away, people. As a matter of fact, a bunch of it went right next door here, and Mrs. Trowbridge doesn't even know that land. She's sitting on it, came from my Wormley Creek. But anyway, that's when we started dredging. And we built that land up, that marsh up. The water actually on low tide went right up through that area right there. You can't tell. And where my house is sitting now, it's about 10 or 12 feet of high ground. And but in Hurricane Donna in 1960, which stimulated me at that point for the dredging and that sort of thing, to do something about more protection. The water came over top of that completely, and the storm went past Cape Henry, Cape Charles, the eye of the storm. And when it got opposite us, the wind shifted with the tide way up, and the waters from the river coming in here like that, rather substantial waves came over that marsh and tore up the marina and sunk a bunch of boats. The boats in those days were outboard boats, a lot of them. They're small boats. And most of them didn't even have wells in those days, they're wooden boats. And if you got a little water in it, the weight of the outboard motor would take the back end down until it came over. But we had such torrential rains even before the storm got here that a lot of those boats were sunk then. But it was interesting. The storm hit here right at sunrise in August, and I'm telling you, excuse my expression, all hell broke loose when that wind shifted, and it lifted concrete pieces off the top of the power plant next door. Sections of concrete that were a floor or something in there. They had a parking lot with cars in it. They weren't sandblasted, they were gravel blasted, except for the employees of the plant over there. Anyway, by about 10 o'clock in the morning, you would have never known that storm was there. It went through that fast. The sun was shining, things had calmed down, but everywhere you looked, trees were down. The water, the creek was full of all kinds of tree limbs and everything you can imagine. Where are we at?
It is now 20 minutes till
10 till?
20 till.
20 till, okay, got 5 more minutes. Okay. Let's see. Back to oysters. As I think I mentioned, I bought the lease, a couple of leases of oyster ground right there where I was going to put the marina. And one of them was from a fellow named Sam Hogg, J.S. Hogg. And he was distantly related to my first wife. But got to know him, I talked to him, and he's basically in retirement at this point. And this is 1955. And anyway, he oystered for a living and clammed, I guess. And I'm assuming he brought all his oysters into the Callis's Wharf. Is that correct, Joel? Anyway, I've got sales slips from him where somebody would order their oysters they wanted. And it's at the top of it, it's got Seaford, Virginia, and then to the right of that is for the year. It's got a 19 and then a 2, 192, and then a dash for you to put the year in. So this is 100 years old. I've got a whole pad full of them over here. Anyway, it has his name, J.S. Hogg, and it's got a DR. I'm not sure what that DR stands for. It's like a medical doctor with an MD back behind his name. It says, planter and shipper of fine Wormley Creek oysters. Dealer in barrel stock, a specialty. That was going on in Wormley Creek. Okay. Heavens, go through those pictures real quick like. I've left out some things. There's just no way I can tell everything. Okay, that's the Oak Point Club right there, and right there is the clubhouse. That's correct, sold at the end of World War II. My mother handled this transaction for him. And she incidentally sold a number of some of the first lots that were sold in Marlbank Farm subdivision. And what you might be aware of, any of you familiar with the people that live there are an awful lot of people from what's now NASA, but it all started out with NACA people that she knew and knew they during the times coming up here to this place for parties and things. They saw how nice this area was, and so they bought property over there. At one time, the director of NASA lived over there. Okay, next picture. Okay, this is still 1940. You notice there's nothing in Marlbank. That's Marlbank. Marlbank Farm subdivision. And the Fahrenholt mansion, it's still there. It's been added to on both ends. One end is a little larger than a double car. It's a double car garage, a large one. The other end is other rooms, I guess. Still there, still occupied. Okay, next picture. Okay, let's see. This is the Marina back in the early 60s. And, well, 1965 approximately. And we can see we've filled in and built up this property where my home is right now. And you'll notice there was nothing here. These were fields that had been plowed and planted and whatever. It's the beginning of all kinds of development here. The power plant is located right in here. Those are the two bulkheads going out where the water comes into the power plant. And the refinery, of course, is on beyond. Okay. Bill? Yeah. Okay, this is a little later. Remember which year it was. But anyway, the Marina's developed quite a bit more by this time, in the 80s. This is, I'm sorry, this is in the 90s. That's my home now. And I built a jetty out there to give more protection to the Marina. At that time, I still owned the Marina. The Marina was sold in 1999, so I've been retired for 24 years.
Tell
Okay.
them about paying for your land twice where you put your house.
Okay, well, she thinks it's funny, I don't. I paid to have all this material dredged up and put over there, and there are trees over there now, like this, oak trees, that came up since the early 60s. But anyway, after doing all that, I finally bought the property, and I had to pay for the land that the material I put up there, plus the marsh, I guess. Anyway, okay, we about got it now, haven't we? We got time for some questions.
Hey, tell them about your boat when you got your first motor,
My boat,
when you were a kid.
my
I
first,
think you were spoiled.
no spoil.
I remember when he ran hydroplanes on Wormley Creek.
That's a pretty key story about the motor.
I'm trying to think which was.
Your boat motor, or your little boat, your daddy bought you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, I had a Sears and Roebuck outboard motor called a Water Witch. That was the name of it. Water Witch. You had to aim it where you were going, because when you wound the rope around the thing and pulled, if it started, you were going in that direction. There was no gear shift or anything like that. Okay. What year was that? It was in the war years, towards the end. Yeah, should have been. Yeah, go ahead. One more. Wrong direction, Bill.
In the late 50s, I bought a 12-horse motor from you to put on my hydroplane. And we water ski behind that thing.
The shark.
Yep, we were the only people.
One more, Bill.
We had our own rig. We wasn't my father's. It had nothing to do with it.
It was red. How many of them did you build, Joel?
2.
Bill, one more. Okay, this is the entrance to Wormley Creek right here. That's a barge. I'm presuming some of these guns were brought up on. I wanted to dwell on this a little bit. This installation was George McClellan's, the Union General's #1 battery. You can go to the next one, Bill, if you can. I think it's got to get a better. Okay, this is a better picture of it. Still, the entrance to the creek is right here, Yorktown up in here. It was aimed at Yorktown along with about 14, something like 14 other batteries, maybe 15, that he installed circling Yorktown to blast Confederate troops out of Yorktown here, like 100.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a question, Mr. Clark. Now, tell me again where so that was the old Waterview house where that battery was?
It was out a little bit in front of it, and a little bit to the west of it, between that and the creek.
Okay.
In my younger days, I could have thrown a silver dollar from my property, where my property is, into that thing.
Across that marsh
Oh.
going to the mountain.
Wasn't across the marshes before you get to the marsh. Anyway, there was two of these cannons could shoot a 200-pound missile up to Yorktown, shell up to Yorktown. It was out of the range of the Confederate guns at Yorktown, and that's why it was put there. The others were 100-pounders, they call them, could shoot a 100-pound shell up to Yorktown. This installation, when it was done, was reportedly the heaviest artillery installation that the world had ever known for a short period of time. And they fired on a Sunday afternoon, I think, a couple of shots up to Yorktown to try it out, and then a few days later they were all set to open up with all their batteries on Yorktown. The Confederates knew exactly what they were up to, and they evacuated the night before, during the night. Okay, Bill. That's the Fahrenholt house as it existed at that time. This is 1862, April of 1862. You look up there, you see a platform that's built on the roof of it. And the people on the platform as lookouts for anything going in and out of the river, and just to see where these shells were going to land at Yorktown, probably to help them zero in on what they're trying to hit. Okay, Bill, is there any more? That's it. Okay, I think I've used up my time.
Tell them about the daffodils. I think that's it.
Can you bring the first one up again? I forgot about that. The first picture, the very first one. Okay. Right in here, which part of the Marina land now, and across in this area were daffodils planted. A man and his sister owned the property, and they owned other properties over in Gloucester, and most of you are probably aware of the fact that in the springtime they grow a lot of daffodils over there. And so when we bought the land from them by where the marina is, they thought they got all their bulbs up. But in the early years of the marina, when people were working on their boats, they had daffodils coming up all around their boats. Very pleasant place to work on a boat. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah.
It talks about the pier that was built out there by the Coast Guard station, I don't know. Can you tell us about that?
Okay. In 1953, they completed a second pier out here parallel to the first one on the east side, beyond this side. And that pier just held pipes, big pipes. They have a tank farm of underground tanks at the Coast Guard base on shore. Anyway, that tank farm for many years held jet aircraft fuel, which was brought in by tanker and discharged by tanker at the end of that pier. The pier, I think, was lengthened on this end too, if I remember correctly. But anyway, it was then pumped ashore and stored, and tugboats with barges would come and get filled. Some went to Langley Field, to the Air Force, and some went to Oceana Naval Air Station over behind Virginia Beach. Is that what you
That
wanted?
was Navy at one time, right? That was at Navy at that time, right? Wasn't it Coast Guard?
No, Navy then, Coast Guard, the Navy left, the Navy Mine Warfare School was transferred to Charleston, about 1957, I believe. And after about the best part of a year, the Coast Guard came in and took it over. So this was, as Art pointed out, that was done before the Coast Guard took it over. It's still, that part is operated by the Navy, as far as I know. Okay.
Did the hurricane take that pier out, 1960?
The what?
Hurricane, 1960, when they had the big hurricane.
Yeah.
Did it take that pier out?
Oh, no. That pier not going anywhere. Yes, sir.
Just curious, I've done a little research on Wormley Creek myself, and I was wondering if during the time that you were involved with that, if you ever came across any ancient ruins of when the Wormleys actually lived in that.
The best I can tell you is that in doing some dredging later, when I bought a barge and crane with a clamshell bucket, every now and then I'd pick up a bunch of the ends of some stakes, and these stakes were right bunched together like they used them to hold fish or something in them. I could just the stakes, you could see where they were sharpened with something made of steel, not something with stone or anything. But of course the worms ate the things off and down into the mud, maybe a foot or something like that. So I'm picking up what's still left. But it was interesting. That had to have been a long time ago. That's all I can think of. One second, one more thing you asked me. One of the first things I did was put in a boat launching ramp, and grading down that thing with a tractor with a blade on the back of it, I ran into some soft brick, which went back a long ways. And I don't know whether it was a little wall there or just what it was. In my haste to get the ramp done, I didn't pay any attention to it. It was in my way. I wanted to get rid of them. Many years later, just 2, 3 or 5 years ago, I happened to be digging something down on my corner of my property right opposite where the Fahrenhold house is, and I ran into a bunch of those bricks. It looked like they were just dumped in a hole or something and covered over. The same soft bricks. I don't know.
I had my boat hauled at Wormley one time, and I just went back home and I got into genealogy, and I remember the Wormley name was in my tree, and I wondered if there was a connection. I did some research, and I found out actually Christopher Wormley, who that creek is named after, supposedly is my 10th great-grandfather. And he came here from Tortuga, got this huge land grant, and actually have evidence of his deed to all of that land. So they lived somewhere, but I found no evidence of where he was buried or where he actually lived here. But his son, Ralph Wormley, ended up at that place near Urbana, where it's Rosemont or some place like that. So the Wormleys went on up there, but while we're down here, they had to live somewhere. So you may have found some evidence.
It could be. Thank you, sir.
I have a comment, not a question, a comment, but I want to tell you what a fine person Philip is. A number of times I had my boat over there, and he was always checking on my welfare. I'm under the boat, sometimes pocket buddy, got bottom paint on it, whole good, and so forth. Bill would walk by and says, "You having fun?"
Thank you. Yes, sir. Do I know when it formed? It's been there since 1938, I can tell you that for sure, and it's been there forever, I guess, almost. Well, I fixed it so you could have pretty much walked across there before we did our dredging.
Remember the back channels used to go around it?
Okay, there's over here, I've got some copies of those things that I got from this fellow in Richmond, of his family, and the last will and testament of the guy that built that Fahrenholt house. It was fascinating reading. And they're not too long, maybe 7 or 8 pages. And you're welcome to take a look at them. And I'll stay here as long as I can. As you want to see any of these things, there's 2 same maps actually, drawn up by the chief engineer or whatever of McClellan's army. Not too accurate on the Wormley Creek part because they had no way to survey it all, and all this was done in a big hurry. When they were here just a short time, they were only here a couple months, but anyway, you're welcome to look at them, and you can see the armament they had. It's all listed. Got some of these same pictures that you've been seeing up here that you can look at and see better, probably being up close. Yes, sir.
Can you point out on this photograph exactly where McClellan's battery was located?
Yes, sir. I'll do my best.
Right there.
Right there. Right there. Just to the left of the house and out in front of it a little bit. Let's see, what else do we have? I've got a book with a bunch of pictures taken around there at that time, and you might find interesting. And I guess that's about it. I'm finished.
Careful. Well, still on? Yeah. Thank you, Bill. And for just a second here, we're going to give Bill an award for being a speaker. But before we do that, and do we have a photographer in the house here? Good enough. Come on. Joan is going to be the photographer. And I wanted to say, this is the second in the Sea Dog series. So the third, we have 4. The third is going to happen here on February the 11th. And Captain Tim Hammond, who was the commandant at the Coast Guard station here, has been promoted to be in charge of all training for the Coast Guard, and he's in Washington. But he'll come down for this talk. So it should be a very interesting talk from the guy that locally he knows it, and now he knows it nationally. So, okay?
Bill, could I add something?
Yes.
Bill Reiser and I have been married for 4 years, believe it or not, in spite of predictions that we wouldn't make it that long. Mostly by Mike and Lois and Rick and Vicki Morgan. But I have learned the most interesting things about Bill's life. It's just so interesting to talk to somebody who's been here since he was so young. And I would like for you to know that though Bill was not in the service officially, he and many other 7-year-old boys guarded Chesapeake Avenue during the war. But in the summers when Bill came up here with his parents, having to leave his friends and he couldn't be a soldier anymore, but he came up here, I don't think he saw shoes or shirt anytime during the summer, which is very good for his dermatologist now. But They also did a lot of land clearing, which he didn't tell about. My parents were kind of easy on us girls, but his daddy thought that boys should work. So they cleared without a tractor, without a backhoe, which he now has, without any equipment. They cleared that land. So he's never been a stranger to hard work, which is hard on me because he thinks I should do the same thing. Anyway.
One more thing, Wormley Creek is still a good place to get your boat hauled. I don't have anything to do with it, but they haul my boat, so I trust them, so I'll give them a plug.
Well, thank you, Bill. And when we take this picture, it'll just take a minute when Joan, if she'll come up, and then ask Bill all the questions you would like. But he has done wonderfully. I mean, he could probably speak for hours, and he has really cut it down for you all a lot. So I appreciate that. Bill, what we have here is like a promissory note. But anyway, all the speakers. Bill, we can't hear you. Well, how about that? I forgot. Okay, so we all speakers are getting a gift to the Yorktown Library. What the library has done is they've worked through lists of books they don't have but would like to have that are the subjects that each speaker speaks about. So I assume this one may have something to do with Wormley Creek. If somebody is writing that book, would they finish it really fast? So, okay. So what we have here is a note from, and here we go. It's, okay, thank you. And so this is a note that says exactly what I just said, that your book will have inside it attached the note that you gave this talk on this day, and this book will be in honor of you. And they're going to let you know, and they'll have a framed award to that this is going to happen. But the library hadn't gotten it yet. Okay? Thank you. All right.